evening. Our top story this week. The baby Veronica case heats up with the real father filing 2 appeals against Oklahoma's lower court rulings to give his daughter back to the Kidnapp-o-biancos. Then, after accusing the real father of failing to negotiate in a good faith effort, Oklahoma's Governor Mary Fallin signs the extradition order from the South Carolina to send the real father back to face charges of custodial interference. So he turns himself in, only to have a judge free him an hour later and sets an extradition hearing date for October 5th. In California this week, Sacramento County's child protective industry is under the microscope after letting a kid die from a drug overdose when the mother was breastfeeding while addicted to methadone. The California State Senate approves legislation that would remove a family's homelessness from the list of automatic reasons to report child abuse or neglect. In Florida, forensic anthropologists are digging up about 50 unmarked graves outside of a reform school for troubled boys, which is beginning to show what a horrible place it was. In Nebraska, the state Supreme Court rules that a real father must be notified of any action to place their children in foster care. There has been a request for a congressional investigation into the CIA's mind control program, claiming that MK-Ultra continued long after CIA experiments on children supposedly no longer existed. In Tennessee, the child protective industry starts a training program for CPS agents who don't know the difference between child abuse and a hole in the ground. And pregnant women looking for a fast buck are now offering positive pregnancy tests on Craigslist with no questions asked. In New Zealand this week, a new study is blaming the overprotective parents for their kids being bullied. In Hong Kong, children are stuck in orphanages while waiting for a year or more to be able to be placed in foster homes. In India, the child protective industry is having difficulties working with other agencies, and the Indian government is looking for ways to support runaway children who have been reunited with their parents. American homeschooling advocates are up in arms after the government of Germany snatched 4 kids from a homeschooling family last week. Then the Germans snatched 40 more kids from a Christian community after allegations surfaced that these people spanked their kids. In Russia, the children of gay parents are having to hide their family ties thanks to a new law which outlaws the propagation of homosexuality, and with a lawmaker now proposing a bill that would deny gays custody of their children, which gays are saying will undermine their rights. In Ireland, a damning watchdog report states that children are being left in foster homes despite the early warning signs of possible abuse. In South Africa, a social worker gets busted with child porn, and the government of China has collected $2 billion worth of fines for violations of their one-child policy in the last year. In Canada, a 6-year-old foster kid in Saskatchewan was beaten to death by an 11-year-old boy. But not to worry, because although that kid is too young to be charged with the crime, he has been placed in a care facility that will ensure he receives adequate supervision and treatment. A real father is ordered to get rid of his pet snakes or face the wrath of the child protective industry. In England, a British Airways pilot gets busted after abusing his position by claiming he was doing charity work for the airline only to molest hundreds of young girls in African schools and orphanages. A British teacher has been banned from the classroom for 5 years for failing to report an allegation of sexual abuse. More than 300 illegal foreigners in England have been able to avoid deportation after arguing that deporting them would separate them from their families and therefore violate their human rights. And a social worker is struck off the register for lying about visiting one kid twice and screwing up the adoption visit of another. The most senior family court judge in England is demanding more transparency in the courts after rejecting social workers' attempts to silence a father whose baby was taken into care against his will and allowing the release of a video of his kid being snatched, which may or may not mean an end to secret family court proceedings in the UK. And Lincolnshire Council is on the hunt for people who are taking care of other people's kids without letting British social services in on the deal. In entertainment news this week, Charlie Sheen's ex is hoping to get custody of their kids back by this coming December. In Iowa this week, the 17-year-old is charged with the first-degree murder and the killing of his 5-year-old foster brother. This just weeks after his poor real mother gave up the fight for her little boy by buying into the lie that he would have a better life. Iowa's child protective industry is claiming that this is the first time they've ever had to deal with a case of one foster kid killing another. During the course of the investigation, it turns out that a 12-year-old girl tried to save the little boy's life by administering CPR, and the kid who stands accused has his trial date set for November. In Wisconsin, it turns out the Career Youth Development staff lied to investigators about a 16-year-old in a group home molesting a 7-year-old girl at a YMCA. In Maine, a man is convicted of terrorizing a Department of Health and Human Services employee for denying him Medicaid. In Ohio, a foster father pleads not guilty to plotting to kill his ex-wife with his foster daughter, who he was having a sexual relationship with. In Michigan, a real mother gets a year in jail for threatening a CPS agent. And in Minnesota, a foster mother is charged with having sex with a 13-year-old boy. In Kansas, oral arguments are scheduled to begin in a sperm donor case where the state's Department of Children and Families are trying to make a man who provided sperm to a lesbian couple pay child support. In Kentucky, a kid who was acquitted of the murder of his stepbrother goes missing from his foster home for the second time in less than a week. In Oregon, police are all worried that a young girl who ran away from her foster home may have gone back to her real mom. And in Maine, a group protested the overreaching authority of the child protective industry after harassing a mother who fed her baby homemade goat's milk formula and chose not to vaccinate. In New Jersey, a real mother is suing a dozen CPS agents for snatching her kid but can't sue the agency, which is protected under sovereign immunity laws. Two parents are suing Iowa's child protective industry, alleging that CPS agents are snatching kids even when there is no proof of harm or abuse by a parent. In California, a couple of real parents are suing the child protective industry because they snatched their kids after finding out the father had legally been prescribed medical marijuana to treat pain associated with chemical exposure during his service in the Gulf War. And finally, tonight in Michigan, a court rules that a mother can't sue CPS agents who let her son die while in their father's care because they have qualified immunity. For these stories and all the latest dirt on the child protective industry, visit www.legallykidnapped.com. And until next week, this is Baby LK, over and out.